Thanks, Anne. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to my Epilepsy and Seizure Awareness presentation. My name, as you can see, is Elizabeth Freeman, and I'm the Marketing, Communication, and Education Specialist at Epilepsy Family Southeast Wisconsin. Before we start, I need to mention and let everybody know that I am not a licensed medical professional, so the information I'm sharing today is just for educational purposes only. My organization is called Epilepsy Family Southeast Wisconsin, and we're an independent nonprofit charity that was founded in 1954. Since that time, we've been out in our Wisconsin neighborhoods working hard to basically assist and empower both individuals and families that are impacted by epilepsy. Some of our support includes offering personalized programs and services to our clients, sharing educational information about epilepsy, both formally and informally, through information booths at health fairs, for example, and by doing community presentations like this one. In the next half hour or so, I will be covering a lot of material. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them, but if you could hold on to them until the end of the presentation, I would very much appreciate it. Excuse me. I like to start off by asking my audience members to take a moment and think about all the people they know who live in the United States. Then I ask them to raise their hands if they know 26 people or more. So I will give you a few seconds to think about that. Now, obviously, since this is a virtual presentation, I can't see anyone's hands. But I would venture to say that between family members, relatives, friends, coworkers, teachers, people you know from church, we probably all know at least 26 people that live here in the United States. The reason I ask this question is because 1 in every 26 people living here in the United States will be diagnosed with epilepsy at some point in his or her lifetime. When I first heard the statistic, I was truly stunned. I kept thinking, that number can't be correct. If epilepsy is that prevalent, why don't I see or hear more about it? I never see any commercials about it, anything about medications. Why do I know so little about this disorder? And that basically is where epilepsy families and organizations like ours come into play. One of our charity's most important goals is to educate the public about epilepsy. So, what exactly is epilepsy? Epilepsy is defined as a very common, again, 1 in 26 people, chronic neurological disorder that is characterized by unprovoked seizures. A neurological disorder affects the brain as well as the nerves all over our bodies. Personally, I don't particularly care for the way it's worded on the slide, and I like to explain it this way. First of all, epilepsy is basically the condition or disorder a person has when they have recurring seizures that happen without any known cause. So epilepsy is basically the condition or disorder. A seizure is the body's response, an event, so to speak, to an abrupt surge of excess energy that occurs in the brain. This explosive surge of energy disrupts all the normal brain functions, causing the brain to send out abnormal signals. And since our brain controls every process in our bodies, when it's not functioning properly, the rest of our body won't either. So, and that's where you have, the different body movements and different things that occur, the symptoms that occur when somebody has a seizure. And basically, to further convolute the explanation, the part of the body that's affected depends on where in the brain this surge of energy occurs. So epilepsy also is the 4th most common neurological disorder in the United States. And that is following a neurological disorder, again, is something that affects both the brain as well as the nerves all over our bodies. And a few well-known neurological disorders are migraine, strokes, and Alzheimer's disease. Currently, there are approximately 3 million people in the United States that are living with these seizures. Another statistic I was really surprised to learn is that twice as many people are living with epilepsy than people who are living with muscular dystrophy, multiple sclerosis, cerebral palsy, and cystic fibrosis combined. And 60,000 of those 3 million with epilepsy live right here in Wisconsin. And unfortunately, 17% or approximately 10,000 of those are children. So as you can see, epilepsy is not rare. Believe it or not, it's not uncommon to experience a seizure at some point in our lives. Anything basically that interrupts the normal connections between the neurons in the brain can cause a seizure. A person could have a seizure, due to an extremely high fever or extremely low blood sugar. Life-threatening dehydration or acute withdrawal from alcohol could initiate a seizure. There are a lot of different things that can cause someone to have a seizure. And a seizure can be triggered basically in anyone at any time, depending on what's going on. And because of this, doctors cannot diagnose a person with epilepsy until they've experienced at least 2 seizures that have no known cause. As you see on the screen, something called grand mal seizures. First of all, there are basically 2 really broad categories for seizures. One of them is called generalized seizures, and the other is called focal or partial seizures. The generalized seizures involve the entire brain, whereas focal or partial seizures obviously just involve then part of the brain. So if I asked basically every person inside and outside of the library there to explain to me, what is a seizure? I would say that 99% of them, including myself, would describe the type of seizure that people picture in their minds when they think about seizures, which is what we call a grand mal seizure. And the grand mal is characterized by the rhythmical jerking of the body and by brief periods of unconsciousness. And grand mals usually last from 1 to 3 minutes. Another type of seizure is called an absence seizure. Absence seizures occur most often in children between the ages of 4 and 14, but they can affect people at any age. A person having an absence seizure is completely unaware of their surroundings. It's very common to see the person staring blankly, almost as if they've checked out. You might see fluttering of the eyelids or other very slight muscle movements, such as smacking of the lips or chewing motions. And one of the issues that we run into with an absence seizure is they're extremely brief, usually 10 to 20 seconds, at 20 at the longest. And children have them oftentimes several of them in a row. And actually some people have had hundreds of absence seizures within a 24-hour time period. But because of their characteristics and their brevity, parents, teachers, and other adults don't realize actually that a child has epilepsy and that they're having a seizure. And unfortunately, these absence seizures are often misinterpreted as, oh, the child's not paying attention, or there's no interest, or they're daydreaming. And that makes it sometimes very difficult because, as I said, they're very easy to miss. So before moving on, I just want to make sure that everyone understands that epilepsy is not a contagious disorder. We're in the present, in the year 2021, we don't hear much about it. We just don't know a lot about it right now. But imagine what it must have been like a long time ago. People right now are alarmed to see somebody having a seizure and they're not quite sure what's going on. Imagine what it must have been like a long time ago. So over the years, this lack of knowledge about epilepsy has caused a lot of fear, and that fear has led to some of these myths, and a lot of them have stuck. So please share with everybody that you know, especially children, that epilepsy is not contagious. I can't stress that enough. One of the most frustrating challenges for people with epilepsy, and for those, frankly, who treat them, is knowing the root cause of this condition. 60% of people that are diagnosed with epilepsy have absolutely no idea what caused it. When we look at epilepsy from an age perspective, we have some understanding of what causes it. When an infant or a child has epilepsy, it could be due to faulty wiring during development in the womb, a birth or a brain injury, or a viral infection such as encephalitis or meningitis. Bacterial infections are much less likely to cause seizures. In young adults, epilepsy is often the result of a head injury from a sports accident, perhaps, or some other trauma to the head. And the most common causes of epilepsy in adults and seniors are usually other neurological disorders such as strokes and Alzheimer's. Anyone can develop epilepsy at any time in their lifetime. In the United States, 150,000 new cases of epilepsy are diagnosed each year. And 50 million people living on the earth today currently have epilepsy. Epilepsy does not discriminate. People of all ages, races, ethnic backgrounds, religions, social classes, genders, etc., can develop epilepsy. How is epilepsy treated? First of all, one of the things that I want to mention is not everybody has epilepsy for their entire life. Oftentimes when children get epilepsy, it eventually goes away. So it's not a lifetime thing for everybody that has that. I just want to mention that. So there are, well, actually, if there are so many cases being diagnosed each year, and millions of people are living with this condition, and we never really hear much about it, it must be a curable condition, right? Unfortunately, the answer is no. Research is ongoing, but currently there is no known cure for epilepsy. The good news is, with the proper medical treatment, about 2/3 of the people diagnosed with epilepsy are able to control their seizures. The other third with epilepsy can continue to live with uncontrollable seizures because none of the available treatments at this time actually have worked for them. Basically, there are 4 approaches that a physician will take to try and control a person's seizures. The first thing that they start out with is anti-seizure medication. But like other medications, a lot of the anti-seizure meds have side effects that some people just can't tolerate. Nausea is a real common one, and obviously if you can't keep the medicine down, it's not going to help. Additionally, some people have what we call refractory or drug-resistant epilepsy. And that's basically when a person still has seizures after using 2 appropriately chosen and well-tolerated anti-seizure medications. So after basically 2 trials, if they still have seizures, then they have what we call, again, drug-resistant epilepsy. One of the ways that doctors will treat a drug-resistant epilepsy is through diet. Dietary therapies are basically used because fats, carbohydrates, and proteins directly affect the chemicals in the brain. And of course, you all know that epilepsy is a disorder that affects the brain. So interestingly enough, research has shown that seizures occur less frequently when people are fasting. So the ketogenic diet, which I'm sure you've all heard of, is recommended for people with drug-resistant epilepsy because the keto diet basically induces a metabolic state in the body that mimics fasting, and that's why it works well for some people. Some of the other options are brain stimulation devices. A brain stimulation device basically involves implanting electrodes into certain areas of your brain. Now, which stimulation device is used depends on the type of seizure a person has and where in the brain it occurs. But basically what they do is they implant electrodes, and these electrodes produce electrical impulses that kind of help to regulate these bursts of energy that cause a seizure. And then the stimulation is caused or is controlled then by a device that's placed under the skin. Sometimes it's almost like a remote control. And again, where under the skin is placed depends on the kind of device that is being used. So that's an extremely simplified, watered down explanation, but I want to give you some idea of, how some of these devices work. Excuse me, water. Oops. Well, brain surgery is another treatment that there you go, that is used to control epileptic seizures. And there are different surgeries that can be done to treat people who have seizures that don't respond to any of the other therapies. Again, the kind of seizures a person experiences and where they begin in the brain are used to determine which surgery will help control somebody's seizures or sometimes even eliminate them. So now I'd like to share some very important information about seizures. And you'll have to forgive me because a lot of this information is bulleted. And I'll be reading directly off of the slides, which I don't like to do. But given how common epilepsy is, you may see someone having a seizure at some point in your life. And before administering first aid, there's important information that you should be aware of. Again, at this point, I like to stress that epilepsy is not contagious. So there's no need to worry about getting near or touching someone who is having or has had a seizure. So first of all, number one thing, if you see that a person fell and has hit his or her head, you have to call 911 immediately. There's really no way to know what's happened in somebody's brain if they fall and hit their head. So, that's an absolute must. Call 911 immediately. When someone is having a seizure, you never want to restrain the person, even though you may have heard that, but you never want to restrain a person having a seizure. You also never want to put something in the mouth of a person that's having a seizure. This is, again, another myth that people think that you can swallow your tongue, and that is physically impossible to do. And actually, trying to put something to somebody's mouth who's having a seizure, it often results in, chipping that person's teeth or breaking their jaw or even an injury to yourself. You can get bitten and they can break your skin. So no forcing anything into somebody's mouth. The timing of a seizure is extremely important if it's possible. And, sometimes it won't be, but you should note the time that the seizure begins. If a seizure gets near 5 minutes in length, it can be life-threatening. And so again, 911 must be called immediately. This is a picture of what we call the recovery position. And putting someone in the recovery position helps basically to keep their airway clear and open. And basically it ensures that, if the person vomits or some kind of fluid, is coming out of their mouths, that it won't cause them to choke. And basically what you're doing is you'll gently roll the person onto their side, and then you just have to make sure that their airway is clear. There is some controversy regarding the best time to use the recovery position. Some people say during, which, if you can imagine, might be very difficult to do, and some say after the seizure. Personally, I think it depends on the type of seizure the person experiences and whether or not keeping the airway clear is an issue or not. Obviously, if somebody is having an absent seizure, for example, where they just space out for a little bit and their eyes are fluttering, you're not going to be worried about that person choking. So it really does depend on the kind of seizure that somebody's having. Seizure first aid key points. The first point may sound very logical, but we've all been in situations that have basically stopped us in our tracks. So it may be scary to witness somebody having a seizure, but try not to panic. Try to keep as calm as possible. You don't really want to move the person. Again, you don't want to restrain them unless they're in danger. And that happens too. People can have a seizure in the middle of the road. or sometimes, you know, unfortunately, I gave a presentation at a library, and the librarian shared with me that one of her really close friends had epilepsy, and she was alone in her house, and her dresser had fallen on her, and she passed away, which is really just, it was so sad. But that's the kind of thing we're talking about. If you can avoid, keep people out of harm's way. In that case, obviously, there wasn't anything anybody could do because no one was home, but you get my point. You're going to want to loosen any tight clothing that somebody has around their neck, if it's a scarf or a tie, and if possible, support their head with something small and soft. You always want to stay with the person until the seizure is done and they're alert. If they, if they have a, sometimes you'll be able to see right away that they have an ID bracelet. Other times you won't, and so you want to check for that. You also want to check for something called a personal seizure action plan. This basically is a form that contains specific information about the person and their epilepsy. It has things such as the type of seizures that they have, how long they last, how often they have them, and what happens. And then they actually will help you, gives you some specifics about what to do to help this person with their particular kind of seizures. It also contains information, emergency numbers and things like that, numbers of their doctor, numbers of their emergency contacts, et cetera, et cetera. So if somebody has one of those, it's extremely helpful. Call 911 if. Again, a lot of these are going to seem very logical, but when you're in a little bit of a panic, sometimes you're not thinking clearly. So if there is a head injury, again, there's no doubt, just call 911. Again, here, if the seizure lasts for 5 minutes or it's getting close to 5 minutes, you need to call 911. If a person has repeated seizures, and this can be difficult because if you don't know the person, you don't know whether or not this is the first seizure they've ever had. So that can be a hard one. But if you notice that somebody is having seizures, repeated seizures, you can tell that they're having a seizure more than once, then definitely call 911. If the person, doesn't return to their normal conscious state following their seizure, you definitely want to call 911. If a person is pregnant, injured, or ill, or is having difficulty breathing, call 911. And obviously, if a seizure occurs in water, it can be incredibly serious and a person can die, so you want to call 911. So you'll see our mission statement on the slide. The mission of our organization is to support and empower people affected by epilepsy by providing personal assistance, public awareness, community education, and continuous advocacy. Again, we're dedicated basically to optimizing the quality of life for all people that are impacted by epilepsy in one way or another. And we really do this by providing really direct, specialized programs and services to our community members that are affected. Just to reiterate, in our state alone, over 60,000 people have been diagnosed with epilepsy, and 10,000 of those people are children. So that basically concludes my presentation. I want to thank everybody for taking some time to listen to this information. We feel it's very important for us to share this information with the public. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them now. And again, Anne, I want to thank you very much for allowing me to share this information with the public.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I know I learned a lot. So thank you, everyone. Take care.